to Southwark Library's Festival of Words. I'm very pleased to be joined here by the author Abigail Dean, author of Girl A. And I'm going to give Abigail the opportunity to go first, and I'd really like to ask you, Abigail, what would you like for people watching this interview to know about the book before we begin?
First, thanks so much for having me, Wes. I'm really excited to be here. So Girl A tells the story of Lex Gracie. And Lex, as a child, manages to escape from her family home, which becomes known over time as the House of Horrors by the press, by the media. And when she does that, she frees her 6 brothers and sisters, and she exposes her parents' cult that has been taking place there, and the kind of crimes they've committed against their children. And Girl A really starts some time after that escape, 15 years later, by which time Lex is a successful lawyer. She's living in New York. She doesn't really think, or at least she tries not to think about the past very much at all. And that is until at the beginning of the book, her mother dies in prison, and she leaves Lex and her siblings the family home, the House of Horrors, where they grew up. And that forces Lex to kind of return to the UK to reconnect with her siblings and to kind of revisit their childhood in order to decide the fate of the house. So yeah, I think Girl A is really, it's a book about how each of the children has sort of coped and failed to cope with what happened to them, and about, I think, how family's sort of strength and resilience can save us, but also about how hard it is to escape the past, particularly when you've been through something like what Lex and her siblings have gone through.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much. I think that says a lot about the book without giving away things that you don't want people to know until they read it. I know that a big part of this book was written in one of our libraries, which is a real thrill for us. And actually, it happens that I showed you this earlier off camera, pre-recording, but this is Dulwich Library's copy that I've just been reading. And it is really exciting for us as a library service to be able to point to that and say, you know, our space was used to create this novel, which has been very successful, and it's there on our shelves. So I wanted to ask you, how did you find the library as a writing environment? I know the whole book wasn't written there, but I read that the seeds of it were produced in Dulwich Libraries.
Yeah, that's very much the case. And it's actually, I found it quite moving in a way to see the copy that is from the library, because when I was writing it there, I certainly never imagined that it would be on the shelves. That's really, thank you for kind of sharing that. I started writing Girl A in the summer of 2018, through July, August and September. And I had just left my job in a law firm, and it was, I don't know if, in my head, it was a heat wave summer. It was a kind of beautiful, beautiful summer. And I lived at that time just by East Dulwich station. So I would walk the kind of 20 minutes to the library along Lordship Lane, and get there every day for around, you know, kind of 10 or 11 a.m. because I'm not an early starter worker.
That's early for some writers, you know, Lex.
Yeah.
Speaking as
exactly.
Oh, I called you Lex. I do apologise, Abby. I do apologise.
Oh, not at all.
I've got Lex so much in my mind, having just finished the book. You see, she's filling my thoughts. Yeah,
that's definitely a good thing. And yeah, the library is very, very beautiful. It has kind of beautiful gardens. There's kind of, the library shelves are all sort of downstairs and generally, and then upstairs there is a kind of quiet working area, which is where I sort of plodded up to every day.
It sounds idyllic, the walk down and then, you know, within the library.
it really was quite idyllic, and I think also the sort of season helped. I think it was, there's often, you have in novels, I think, that sense of sort of like a really idyllic summer. Often beneath the idealism, there's a sort of there's a darkness running through, but for this there really wasn't. It was a very, very fortunate kind of time that I think I had then, and I was definitely sort of recovering from a really difficult time at work. I'd been really, really unhappy, and it was a huge kind of solace to have this routine that I just really, really enjoyed. And yeah, lunchtime I'd pop out to Harry's Cafe on Lordship Lane, or
I'm interviewing you from Canada Water Library, but this is going to mean a lot to the Dulwich Library regulars for sure.
Yeah, and Dulwich Park is obviously kind of just down the road from the library, so kind of we'll sometimes have a walk there, and usually work until the library closed at around 7:30, 8 p.m, which is kind of my favorite time to work, is kind of into the early evening. And it was a lovely environment. It was kind of usually this kind of relatively busy, but you'd see the same people every day. The same kind of old man would come in to read the newspaper, and it had a real kind of charm to it.
Brilliant. That's lovely to hear. And we've got this result from it. So I said, embarrassingly for me, I called you by your character's name there. And the reason I mention it again is because it was partly because she's in my thoughts generally, but I also had a mind to my next question, which is, Lex is a lawyer like yourself, and that made me wonder how much of you think there is in her as a character.
Yeah, I don't think there is a huge amount of me in Lex. I think that the profession-wise, there are certainly kind of elements of my experience in Lex's work. So there's that environment that she lives in terms of departure lounges and meeting rooms and kind of quite clinical offices. And that's definitely a landscape that I'm familiar with, and one that I kind of occupied for sort of a good 5-6 years. And I think that for me, in a way, that environment I found quite cold and quite exhausting in a way. That lifestyle of kind of flying off to negotiate a contract alone, it takes you away from obviously from your family and your friends. But I think that for Lex, she finds a huge amount of comfort in that lifestyle, because it's so kind of clean and logical, and I think it kind of suits her sense of detachment.
Great.
So in a way, there's a real contrast between us in that Lex is probably a much more dedicated private practice lawyer than I ever was, because I think I had some kind of resentment for that lifestyle, whereas I think that for her it's her sort of refuge in a way.
You were able to give her an appreciation for it that maybe you hadn't been able to embrace in full yourself, which is that's a great thing to be able to do in fiction, I think. I wondered, this is another library question, because there's a second way that this relates to libraries. When Lex and her sister Evie are fantasizing about what they would do with £1 million, Lex says that for her it was always a library. And so I couldn't help wondering to what degree her love of reading, which comes in other ways in the book as well, were influenced by your writing environment, or do you think that always would have been there if you'd been writing it somewhere else altogether?
I love that question, and I think it is a way there that maybe elements of my personality do come out in Lex and in Evie, and to some degree in Ethan, in terms of he is also a sort of dedicated reader, I think, in some ways. And yeah, I think I was somebody who, as a child, did have did find kind of a huge love of books, and my parents were both English teachers, so I was very lucky that they were nothing like Lex's parents. They loved reading, and
That's good to hear.
It's very good to hear. Still relieved. So yeah, they loved books, and sort of I was kind of encouraged really early on to read completely for pleasure as well. So I loved Judy Blume, and I loved Roald Dahl, and R.L. Stein's Goosebumps books. I had like shelves and shelves of them. So I think that is definitely an element of the characters that really does come out. And I mean, I'm not sure if I had sold a company as or inherited a huge amount of money, I think that a library would definitely be on my list of house renovation purchases. Yeah.
Fantastic. So then also you mentioned a few authors there that you enjoyed as children. And I wondered if you were able to tell me, I might be putting you on the spot a bit here, but I have to ask if there were any particular authors or books that influenced Girl A in particular. And it might be R.L. Stein.
I think he definitely influenced my love of kind of writing. I think for Girl A in particular, so one of the writers who's just influenced my writing a huge amount is Rupert Thompson, who wrote The Insult and Death of a Murderer. I think I first read his novels when I was sort of 14, 15. They were some of the sort of first adult novels that I read. And I just remember thinking that his writing was just so stunning. His descriptions, the way he describes kind of light in different rooms is so beautiful. And I think that that gave me something to aspire to in terms of my own writing. I mean, it almost felt like kind of opening a sort of another room up in terms of just what you can do with words when I first kind of read his books. But I think in terms of more around the plot, I was really inspired by both The Road by Cormac McCarthy and A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara.
Okay.
Because I think those are two books where they're in some ways incredibly kind of dark stories. The Road is kind of post-apocalyptic landscape, and
I usually warn people if they tell me they're about to read The Road, just kind of a heads up. Don't not read it, but just be aware. Yeah.
Exactly. It's very, very grueling. But I think what is incredible as well is it's also just an incredible sort of like some of the scenes of tension. I'm thinking in particular of one of the greatest written scenes of all time, when the man and boy descend into a basement looking for food. The scenes are so tense. They kind of are also the best of kind of like almost like an action adventure thriller writing, combined with this gorgeous sort of like descriptive prose, and also the beautiful sort of story of the man and the boy and their tenderness and love, and how that comes out in the dialogue. I think it was the contrast of the grueling nature that you mentioned, that you need to give people a warning, with that kind of beauty of human relationships that I really wanted to kind of capture in Girl A, because I think that Girl A, although it's a book about trauma in some ways, I also think it's quite a hopeful book, and I think that there is such tenderness between the siblings in different ways that was something that was really important to me, that it never felt anything other than hopeful and resilient in a way.
That makes a lot of sense in terms of, as I was reading around the book, I found several places where it's described as a thriller, and I was a long way into the book at this point, and I kind of thought, oh, is it a thriller? And as I thought about it, I thought, yeah, there are things about it, but I think because of where it starts, as you described at the top of this interview, you might not readers might not necessarily perceive it that way because it focuses so much on, as you say, relationships between siblings. And I think that kind of speaks to the layers that are in it. That's not really a question, that's more of a comment on it. But yeah, that certainly will help people to understand where it comes from, I guess. It's more than one place for sure. So oh yeah, we've talked a bit about the way that you mentioned that you might see some of yourself in Lex, but she's also very different, and that maybe some of your own love of reading is reflected in Ethan as well. So I was wondering, do you relate to any of the other characters in different ways, or are those two characters more what's the word? No, let me just say, do you relate to any of the other characters?
I do, yeah. I actually, I think that there's probably sort of very small aspects of my personality in many of the characters. I won't say in all of the characters because I don't want to associate myself with, say, Gabriel's adopted parents, who are kind of the worst people in the world. So I mean, I think there are limits, but I think that in a huge amount of characters that, you know, there are certainly traits that I understand and that I think I have kind of expressed at different times. So I have a huge amount of kind of empathy, I think, with Gabriel, in terms of sort of, you know, he desperately wants to sort of be known or kind of to sort of make the best of this kind of terrible situation that he finds himself in. And I think that's quite a universal trait in some ways. I think he's a very kind of sympathetic character. But yeah, I think there are you know, Ethan, again, Lex's older brother, is a character who a lot of people I think will detest. But I do see parts of myself in him. You know, I'm not sure if I'd been in the house and gone through the childhood that the Gracie children do. I'm not sure if I would have come out with the sort of dignity and grace that maybe Lex does, or you know, as opposed to sort of the struggle to survive, which, you know, leads Ethan to some much kind of darker places. I don't think I have confidence in my own character that under those circumstances I would have acted ideally, I think, in a way.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful in terms of it's easy for us all to tell ourselves that we'd behave heroically in such circumstances, but who knows if we were really there. So all of this kind of ties into the fact that there are a number of twists and surprises in the book, and particularly of the kind that might make a lot of readers want to go back and read it again from the beginning to see it from that different perspective. So without wanting to spoil anything, were you conscious when you were writing it, or I wonder from what point were you conscious from the beginning of writing towards a twist or a surprise, or did those things surprise you as well as the writer?
I think I was quite conscious of some of the major twists in Girl A. So I'm not a big planner in terms of writing. I have a very vague plan, you know, maybe two like typed sheets of A4, which is really not very much. You know, I've seen other writers like beautiful Excel spreadsheets, and I'm just, yeah, much more all over the place. But I think I do like to have an idea of some of the main events that will take place, and certainly how the novel will end. I think it's really useful, and or at least I find it very useful to have that in mind when setting out. So I did know kind of clearly what the final scene of Girl A would be very early on, I think. And it's the same in my kind of second novel. Like I right from the beginning, I kind of knew ultimately where things would end up, but maybe not quite how they would get there. And I think that's one of the sort of pleasures in writing, I think, for me, is having some faith in the kind of characters and in the story. that they will develop and that they will kind of make it work, like that they'll kind of do some of the heavy lifting in getting to that ending. It always feels kind of terrifying when you're not sure exactly how, you know, that those massive chunks will play out. But I think that's also some of the fun of it, is having a faith in like your imagination, which is always kind of working in the background and sometimes does surprise you.
Sure. Brilliant. Thank you. I was wondering also, this is something that I haven't really touched on yet, but the way that people are named within the book, there's a lot that's interesting about that. One of the obvious ones being that Lex refers to her father and to her dad always as father and dad, and those are, you know, that struck me as it might be a kind of obvious way, but it's a very, very clear way, a big way to distinguish or to highlight the way that how we name people is important. And one of the things that I noticed was that I think nearly all the children have biblical names, but Lex's name isn't really a biblical name. And I wondered if that was a conscious decision, or do you remember?
It's a great question, and I think it's probably something I'm slightly guilty of in terms of I think that she to me was always Lex, so I think that there's a slight bias in terms of just, I think I would have found it very, very difficult to change her name, because it was probably the first name that kind of that was with me. I think that, you know, that's sort of my very practical reason for not for her not having such a biblical name. I also think that generally the children's names kind of become more religious. So I think, you know, Ethan is not kind of a major biblical character in the way that some of the later children names have associations. So I think that some of it also is that increasing, the sort of increasing isolation and kind of dedication that Lex's parents have. That initially sort of religion is kind of a kind of communal aspect of their lives, and gradually it becomes far, far more extreme. I mean, it becomes a kind of excuse for fathers' behavior, and I think the children's names, which are increasingly religious, reflect that as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I was also, I don't know if this is conscious or not, but I became conscious when I finished it, and when I was thinking about the kind of Lex's interest in reading and the you know, her wish to have a library, that Lex is a kind of literary, or could be a literary allusion as well, as in lexicon. So again, it doesn't need to be deliberate, but that's kind of there as well. Brilliant, thank you. So I looked back at some of the articles that were written when the book was signed, and you actually just mentioned about the second book, because you signed for a 2-book deal. So back then it was called The Conspiracies. Is that still the case? Is it still the same book that you're writing, that you plan to? What's going on?
It is still called The Conspiracies at present. I'm not sure if it will still be called that in a year, but you know, the first draft is complete and it still has that name. So it is still it is still kind of relatively faithful to the plan. And when I say plan, you know, I think that it's, as is often the case with a 2-book deal, you know, obviously you have the first novel kind of has to be finished. That's what you kind of go to publishers with and go to agents with. And the second book is much more kind of wispy and vague. And I think it was kind of, you know, we had a few paragraphs of what we thought it was going to be about, or what my agent and I kind of discussed and what I wanted to write about. The novel fulfills those paragraphs, but I think it's kind of maybe in a way similar to my kind of absence of kind of immaculate planning, in that I think that they were such broad. It's probably such a broad description. You know, it's going to be about conspiracy theories. The kind of the characters of surprised me as I kind of hoped they would. And it's, yeah, I think that in your head you often have ideas about a novel as well, especially about how immaculate it will be and how clean and sort of wonderful. And in the writing, it isn't, like, there is a sort of real practicality and drudgery in a way of actually getting the words on the page. And I think you will always lose that magic idea to some degree, because I think that's the writing of it. In your head, it's perfect, and then on the page, it's messier and it's harder. So that's how it feels like it's evolved to me. But at the same time, now it's also a novel in a way that it wasn't when it was an idea. So that's satisfying too.
It's moved from magic to reality, or it's moving from magic to reality. Yeah.
Exactly, and that muddies it always. But I suppose that, yeah, if you wanted to just preserve the idea forever, it would just never happen. So it's part of the process.
That I run the writing group here at Canada Water Library, and so as I imagine that some of my group members will be watching this, and I think anyone who's tried to write almost anything, fiction or non-fiction, that will make a lot of sense. The way that things are in your head compared to how they are on the page, and trying to recreate what you started off with in your own mind there, have it come to become magic again for other people. It's quite a process, of course. So we've kind of strayed into talking about the publishing process, and as I think that some of the people, as I've just mentioned, who are paying attention to our Festival of Words will be writers and aspiring writers themselves. We've got a workshop which is about how to move from an idea to a book. Exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. So I just wanted to invite you to maybe give those watching something of an insight into how that was for you as a writer, because it must have been amazing to go from having your manuscript to having multiple publishers bidding for it. And I guess I wonder what was. Can I ask, how many times did you have to send it out, or what was your experience as a writer? How much, I guess, did you expect to get to this point? And do you have any tips for people who are looking for publishers or want to? That's a lot of questions in one, but however you want to take that.
I guess I'd say the first thing maybe I should say is that some of the writing process and the benefit of being able to go to Dulwich Library every day, that probably all sounds like a very, well, as we said, kind of an idyllic process. So I got about halfway through the first draft of Girl A at that time, and then at the next 9 months I was back at work and writing in the evenings and at the weekends when I really didn't want to, and it was winter and everything was much more miserable than the beautiful kind of summer in Dulwich Library. So I think that was the real slog part, and felt tremendously difficult at times. Like I really had to, I essentially had to share the novel with some friends and with my partner, because I was just so close to giving up that I basically needed some cheerleaders, because I was just, resenting at times having to write. So yeah, it was finished 9 months after I kind of went back to work. And then I edit a lot as I go along, so I didn't have kind of much of an editing process at the end, because I'd kind of edit on a chapter by chapter basis quite extensively. And to be honest, then just started to look for agents, and I had no real expectations at all. I just knew, the people I shared Girl A with had really loved it, and essentially, I think my husband said, well, we might as well send it to some agents, And, if it doesn't go well, we'll just publish it anyway. We'll just self-publish it. So why not give it a whirl? Which was sort of my attitude a bit as well. And at that time, I was quite busy at work. So I made the terrible mistake, and I'd advise anyone not to do this, of using a holiday to contact agents.
Right.
So I was like, I've got a week off. So fantastic. I'll use this time to prepare my cover letter and my summary of the novel. And it was just a terrible idea. It just totally obliterated the holiday. Yeah, that wasn't great. And obviously, as soon as you send stuff to agents, you start worrying about it. You start refreshing your inbox and just being a generally kind of absurd human being. So yeah, I think that getting the manuscript kind of as good as it can be before it goes out, and also just finding really good agents who represent books that are similar. And I guess I don't mean sort of too similar, because there's always, then you might have issues in terms of, we've kind of got something like that on our list. But I think that I know that, for example, Juliet, my agent, one of her favorite novels is Room by Emma Donoghue. So that was a very kind of good connection that I could make. I think my novel has elements of that, but it's very, very different.
The novel, some people might know it as the novel that became the Brie Larson film Room later on, just for anyone wondering. I'm going to make sure, by the way, all the books that have been mentioned, most of them I know are available in Southwark libraries, but if there's anything you've mentioned that isn't yet, I will put it on order for the library service. So yeah, we'll make sure of that. If anyone's listening in thinking, can I get these from Southwark libraries? If you can't yet, you will be able to very soon. Yeah.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think that would be really good also for aspiring writers to hear, just looking at you having this book on the shelves and not only available for sale, but selling. And all of the things you're saying are things that certainly the writers in my group will, and I think writers generally who are still hoping to get things published, will be able to relate to really well. So like you say, having your manuscript as good as it can be, and I get what you're saying. You're looking for an agent who has an affinity with what you're doing, because otherwise, I guess you're wasting your time if you're sending it to people who publish completely different kinds of books or represent completely different kinds of books.
Yeah, I think so. I also know that the reason that I sort of really really had felt that Juliet was the right agent was because she actually didn't think that the manuscript was ready to send to publishers. And I think for me, it was really difficult to accept that, because, I mean, receiving criticism's rubbish. I don't know anyone who's like, oh, great, feedback. But it's so, yeah, it is so helpful, and I think important to have people who do kind of, you have the difficult conversations with, and it really hurts at times. It sucks when you've spent a year working on something and then someone's like, oh, actually, this character, this chapter, they're not working. But yeah, I certainly found that a real challenge to get used to people criticizing something that for me was quite a personal, private thing. But it is valuable, and I think that I then spent 4 months editing the novel with Juliet, my agent. So yeah, I think if you can do that before, and if you have those trusted people, I think that's also really, really helpful. But it is hard, and yeah, I've not found it easier for this second novel either. So I'm definitely not kind of preaching as somebody who is happy to be told when things are rubbish.
Oh well, yeah, but like you say, you've got it at that point. You've got the manuscript as good as you thought it could be. So of course it's going to be hard to then be told, actually, you need to go back and change this and this, and there's still lots of work to do. But like you say, that's how you get to the finished product. So yeah, I think that's all really good and useful for us all to hear. I think we've got through the questions that I'd written down, and more have come up along the way. So Is there anything else that you wanted to say to Southwark Library's members and to anybody else who might be watching this interview as part of our Festival of Words?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess I would say a huge thank you to Southwark Libraries for giving me this kind of haven for starting writing. And I'm just down the road in Forest Hill now, so I'll have to pop by to see Girl A on the library shelf.
I've got to get it back there before you can see it there, because right now it's here. But I'll be getting, and I know also yesterday, one of my colleagues, when she saw that I was interviewing you about this, she said, "Oh, someone asked for that yesterday." So that's gone out for a reservation. So there might even be a queue before you can see your own book. You might need to reserve it, Abigail, in order to get your own book. And I don't know if any authors want to do that. Brilliant. Thank you so much again. And we'll be looking forward to the next one. All the very best of luck with it. Whether it ends up still being called The Conspiracies or not, sounds like a great title to me. Especially with all the conspiracy theories that have been flying around the last couple of years, especially. So yeah, wonderful stuff. And we look forward to more. Thank you so much, Abigail Dean.
Thank you.